Well, good morning. The dust is settled and the results are all in from the Michigan primary election. Now that the final candidates have been selected, what can we expect in November? Today we're going to talk about that with a veteran of the UP political wars. It starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Now here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, in a sense, Mike Percy began his political career as a United Steelworker at the Empire Mine, where he was elected to several terms as president of United Steelworkers Local 4950. Then when legendary State Representative Dominic Jacobetti passed away, shortly after being reelected in 1994, Percy threw his hat in the ring to replace him and was elected to fill that seat. He was reelected to 2 additional terms before being term limited. In 2002, he was elected to the Michigan Senate from the 38th District and served until term limits again forced him to leave in 2010. Senator Percy, welcome back to the Ryan Report.
Good to be here, Don. It's kind of strange. I haven't been in the interview chair in a few years, so it's good to be back.
Glad to have you back. Are you still interested in politics, still involved to some extent?
I'm very interested. I'm not heavily involved. I attend a lot of local Democratic functions and try to work with some of our candidates and our local party officials, but that's as far as my involvement goes.
And I know you did some consulting for a while, but you've kind of moved away from that as well.
Yep, I'm pretty much fully retired.
Okay. Well, let's get your perspective, and it is a Democratic perspective, but also a perspective of someone who, has followed politics for many years, to what happened in this last election. I think the biggest surprise, and you can tell me what you think, was the outcome of the Republican nomination for the congressional seat, Dan Benishek's seat. I think going in, a lot of people felt it was a battle between Casperson and Jason Allen, but instead a different outcome. What's your reaction?
Yeah, I think Jack Bergman came out of nowhere. I mean, I saw his announcement that he was going to throw his hat in the ring and didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it, and then boom, he came up with some pretty effective commercials, and the next thing you know, he's the Republican nominee for the 1st Congressional District, and he invested a significant portion of his own money into the race, and I guess it paid off because he surprised a lot of political insiders by beating 2 veteran politicians.
And he calls home water's meat, apparently, but he actually did best downstate. Tom Casperson carried the UP and every county in the UP except Chippewa, but Jack Bergman carried many of the counties downstate.
Yeah, that was a surprise because I thought if he was going to have an impact on the race, it would be taking votes away from Tom Casperson, but obviously he piled up his winning margin below the bridge, and I don't know if that was a result of his commercials or if he did a lot of appearances down there, went down and did some door-to-door or shaking hands, but yeah, Tom did real well in the UP as would be expected.
And just so people understand, the district now includes 32 counties, 15 above the bridge, 17 below. The only counties Jason Allen carried were Grand Traverse and Leelanau. Grand Traverse obviously very big, but still you have to do better than that.
Yeah, Jason represented Grand Traverse and Leelanau in the State House and the State Senate. I served in both chambers with Jason Allen, so it would be expected he'd win his own backyard.
And it turned out to be kind of a nasty race toward the end. What were your thoughts on that?
I was on the ballot 5 separate times. I don't think I ever ran a negative spot. I never ran a negative commercial or put a negative ad in the paper. I think that hopefully will wear itself out, but it seems like the consultants that are such an integral part of all these congressional races and governors and senators races, they think that negative campaigning is the way to go, and I hope the voters across the country, but particularly here in the UP, will reject some of that negative campaigning and start looking at and having candidates that put themselves forward with their program and their plans and their positions on issues, and hopefully get voters to sway that way rather than try to tear someone else down with some really silly negative campaigning.
And we now have these political action committees who kind of march to their own drummer. They don't answer to any candidate. And we saw some of that in this campaign with some very negative ads. We don't know where the money comes from or who they are. But
that's a result of Citizens United and the Supreme Court okaying that kind of political activity and contributions. And when you're not accountable, you can say things basically the way you want to say them and color things in a negative light and never have to answer to the truthfulness of it or to whether it's beyond the bounds of decency or so I think at some point we need to revisit that issue and start, if we're going to accept all this money into politics, we should at least as voters and citizens be made aware of where that money is coming from and what interests are behind these ads.
And you understand this as well as anyone, but today you can find something negative about anybody. Many representatives or senators, whoever they might be, are required to make certain votes that they're maybe not that enthusiastic about, or to state an opinion on something that is taken out of context. We see a lot of that, don't we?
Yes, we do, and from personal experience, there were some votes I took in Lansing that I really wished I didn't have to do that, but there are some instances where you've given your word on an issue or circumstances change and you do something, but over the course of thousands of votes, there's always going to be a few that you can cherry pick out and make it look as though you're not representing your constituency or not staying true to your principles, and it's easy for consultants to pick that apart and color it.
And it wasn't a surprise on the Democratic side, I don't believe, do you?
No, Jerry Cannon is a great guy. I supported Jerry 2 years ago. I thought he would have made a great congressman, but he had his chance, and I think Lon Johnson brings some new energy, some new vitality to the race, and I was supporting Lon through this campaign, and I will be supporting him through November.
Okay. We've got some other interesting races coming up. I want to talk about them in just a couple of minutes. We'll get to that after we take this break. Again, our guest is former state representative and state senator Mike Crute. Let's talk about some of the other UP races. I think that 108th is kind of an interesting situation because it's an open seat. And if you look at the history of that district, it tends to go sometimes Democratic, sometimes Republican. Sometimes the winners are from Delta County, sometimes from Dickinson County. I think the only time from Menominee County it was Bart Stupak.
Actually, Judy Narat held it for one term.
That's true. That's true.
Judy,
I forgot about Judy.
Unfortunately, lost the seat to Ed McBroom and then passed away shortly after.
Yeah.
She was in ill health through her entire only term.
And I shouldn't have forgotten her because she was a guest on this show. And actually, even though Bart was from Menominee, he grew up in Gladstone,
yes.
I think so.
Yeah.
Anyway, this year, Democrat Scott Solello will be facing Republican Bo LaFave. Any thoughts on that race?
Well, the Solello name in Dickinson County is pretty widely known. There's a Solello sitting in the judge. There was a Solello as a sheriff, I think that, like you said, is going to be interesting because that seat has a tendency to go back and forth between the parties, and I think. From my personal perspective, the Solello name should carry it in Dickinson County, but Menominee and Delta are also pretty tough places to make a campaign happen, so it's going to be interesting.
And there's a young man named Bo LaFave who is running on the Republican ticket, apparently still going to school, putting some time aside to run for politics, so it'll be kind of an interesting race over there.
Yes, it will.
The last 16 years, the seat has been held by Republicans, as you probably recall, between Ed McBroom and Tom Casperson, but there were some great names like Jack Gingras from the past and others as well.
Dave Anthony.
Dave Anthony was there for...
Doug Bovin. Dave had about 4 terms. Doug had 2 terms and he left with 1 to go to run for the Senate, and I ended up beating him in the primary in 02.
The 109th, probably John Keevala will be, not probably, John Keevala will be going for his 3rd and final term. He's being opposed by Republican candidate Pfister. Republican has never won this seat.
It's been a long time, probably since the 1940s or early 50s. Jacob Eddy held it for 40 years. I had it for 6, and Adamini, Lindbergh, and now Keevala. So I'm pretty sure John's a pretty safe bet to be reelected to that seat, and then it comes open again in 2 years.
I was a little confused because I have a long enough memory that I remember when this district was the 108th district, and the Southern District was the 109th, and apparently it was around 1992 that, after the census, I guess, that they for some reason changed.
Yeah, I remember campaigning in Iron County and Baraga County, and people recalling when Jacob Eddy used to represent those counties when they used to be in the 108th, and
Right.
Jacob Eddy was the 108th, and it's been it's switched around a lot over the years, but it's the 109th has been a pretty safe Democratic seat. I don't even live in the 109th anymore.
That's right.
The latest redistricting put Ishpeming Township into the 110th, so Scott Dianda is my state rep.
And that's the next one we want to cover. Scott Dianda will be running for re-election. Again, he will be term limited after this term. His Republican opponent is Gregory Markinen, a teacher and member of the Hancock City Council. Again, the incumbent has a lot going for him.
Yeah, it's very difficult to take out an incumbent, although I shouldn't say that. Scott Dianda took out Matt Hookey 4 years ago, and Matt had served one term as was an incumbent, and Scott managed to unseat him. So in the world of UP politics, certain rules don't always apply in every instance. So but Scott's been doing a great job down in Lansing, and I anticipate his re-election as well.
And in the 107th, Lee Chatfield, Republican, will be up for re-election, being opposed by Phil Belfie. Again, someone difficult to
Right.
turn
And
someone out who's done well.
I'm not real familiar with the East End, and never having represented any of the counties down in those districts. And I know it was Pat Gagliardi's seat for a long time, and
Right.
when Pat was term limited out, it switched back to the Republicans, and it's been Republican ever since. So I'm not familiar with either of those gentlemen.
And of course, we have to bring up your old seat, the 38th Senate seat, now held by Tom Casperson, will be up in 2 years. There was some thought, of course, that if Casperson was re-elected to Benishek's seat, it would be open sooner, but still, probably a lot of competition lining up for that seat. I know Ed McBroom has already expressed his interest.
Yeah, when it comes open in 2 years, I'm pretty sure you'll see Ed's name in the race. John Keevala and Scott Dianda have both expressed interest in the race, so that will be a couple of tough primaries, I anticipate, as well as a pretty tough general election, no matter who comes out.
And I think we'll take a break before we jump to, I want to talk about the Empire Mine, and obviously you have a lot of history there. So we'll get away from politics and talk about the Empire Mine and more after we take a break for this message. We're talking with former state representative, State Senator Mike Crute. We were talking about election issues. The Empire Mine closing. This is kind of wipe out a lot of memories for you, or bring back a lot of memories for you.
Oh, it certainly does, Don. A lot of times on our way to camp now, I'll drive through Palmer to go. We're going to camp down by Gwyn to my wife's family's camp, and I'll drive through Palmer just so I can look over at the Empire Mine again. And it's not unexpected, but it's still a blow to the area, and it's still a blow to the people that had jobs there. I mean, I hired in at Cliffs in '74 when there were almost 5,000 people working at the Republic, Humboldt, Matherby, or Improvement, Pioneer, and they're building the Tilden and expanding the Empire. And as those properties have faded away, it's always tough to see what happens to the families whose breadwinner loses their jobs as a result of these closings. But iron ore is a finite resource, and it's only valuable if you can sell it, and obviously the market's not there to support continued operation.
As you mentioned, there were about 5,000 people back at that time. I think now it's around 1,200, and probably will drop to around 800 or so when the Empire Mine closes.
I think there are 700 hourly left at the Tilden, and there's going to be about 100 salary people left. So yeah, it's a dramatic decline from when I started with Cliffs 42 years ago now. Gosh.
The Cliffs chairman has said that the Tilden Mine is still an important piece of their operation. Hopefully we can continue to see operations go on there for many years to come.
You know, we've always said their reserves are there for 25 or 30 more years of operation, and as long as the domestic blast furnaces are still making iron or making steel out of a blast furnace, they'll need iron ore pellets, and hopefully the Tilden pellet will be in demand.
And again, not to get real technical, but back in those early days, the days you were talking about, most of the steel in this country was made from iron ore pellets. 90-some% for sure. Now, probably over half, or at least half, is made in electric furnaces, melting scrap.
Right.
Much smaller market for iron ore. They are, again, talking about direct reduced iron, producing a pellet which can go into an electric furnace, but it appears that the Minnesota ores are more amenable to that product from what we hear.
Yeah, I know they're talking about doing a direct reduced iron project in Minnesota, and I know there's been work done on that. I remember 10 or 12 years ago doing a press conference with Governor Granholm and Bart Stupak and Cliffs officials and Japanese Steel Company officials. There was hopes we were going to do direct reduced iron here on the Marquette Range, but the technology never panned out and the investments fell through. So it is the way of the future, because these arc furnaces are going to need some virgin iron units.
Let's talk about a couple of other things. Electric power. You know, Governor Snyder in 2015 asked the legislature to come up with a plan, and they couldn't do it. And so far they haven't done it in 2016. What are the big issues and big concerns here?
There's, we've had the choice issue that was cooking around and back in the 90s when I was in the House and all through my Senate term. So there are a lot of players that want to get in. You have the big incumbent utilities, consumers and Detroit Edison, and a lot of the co-ops and different municipal power groups. And then you got the consumers who obviously need to have affordable power. So it's a very complex set of players that you have to bring to the table and try to come up with something that works for everyone. I know in my second term in the Senate, we did another energy bill and put some renewable energy portfolio standards into statutes. So I think they want to revisit a lot of those things and try to deal with the choice and the renewables and the affordability, and it's very complex.
And it's being driven too by the fact that many power plants are closing, coal-fired plants, and we're going to have to replace some of that generation.
You know, that's something that I don't think a lot of people understand. When you have a power plant like Presque Isle or dozens of plants down below the bridge that were built 50, 60, 70 years ago, that technology is aging. It's hard to upgrade. It's spewing pollution, and people want to have affordable power that's there when they need it. They don't understand how difficult it is to get that power on transmission lines and get it to communities and do it under the regulatory scheme from Washington.
There is a plan to possibly build a new gas-fired plant to service the mines. From what you hear, is that still on track? And of course the mines are now one mine.
There's now one mine, and I know there was hopes that Cliffs would build one that would service the mines as well as have some power and be a merchant, selling power on the UP grid. I've not been with the folks from Cliffs for a couple of years to talk about what's going on there, and I'm not sure if Cliffs is in a financial position to put up the $500 million or so necessary to get that plant built.
We have less than a minute to go. Back to elections. The House and Senate have been in Republican control now for some time. Michigan election, presidential level, it's not, the polls are very heavily in favor of Hillary Clinton. Could this be a year when coattails are important in determining the outcome of some of those races?
Oh, definitely. It depends on how energized the base is and who turns out to vote. And how far down ballot they stick with it, but I don't know if Hillary will have the coattails to sweep through the UP, but there are a lot of urban areas and places down below the bridge where I think she can have an impact and perhaps help change the makeup of our legislature.
It'll be interesting to see the outcome. Thanks for coming in and talking with us this morning.
I appreciate it. I kind of miss this stuff, Don.
It's good to have you back. Okay, I'll return with some other thoughts for you after we take this break. couple of days ago, on a beautiful summer evening, I was sitting on a bench in my backyard and started reminiscing about when I was a kid. My thoughts went back to me sitting by my radio, listening to Harry Heilman and later Van Patrick with their play-by-play reports of the Detroit Tiger baseball games. A lot of old names came flooding back. Outfielders Vic Wertz, Johnny Groth, and Hoot Evers. Infielders like George Kell and Harvey Keene. Some great pitchers named Hal Newhouser, Art Houdeman, Fred Hutchinson, and Virgil Trucks. And as I was thinking about the pitchers from those days, this thought crossed my mind. In the world of sports, our athletes keep getting better every year. Runners are faster. Those who jump higher. Weightlifters are stronger. Basketball players keep getting taller and more skilled. I could go on, but there's also an exception to that rule, the Major League Baseball pitcher. Today we constantly hear about pitch counts and the number of innings thrown by Major League pitchers. It seems like today's pitchers have gotten a lot softer compared to those who came before them. A complete game by a pitcher today is a rare occurrence. Once a pitcher gets up to 100 pitches, they start watching him carefully, and very few get beyond 120. Over the course of a season, even the best seldom pitch much beyond 200 innings in a year. So how does this compare with pitchers in the past? I took to the internet and came up with some interesting stats. Like the Tigers' Hal Newhouser in 1947 pitched 272 innings and had 19 complete games. The Cleveland Indians' Bob Feller in his career pitched 279 complete games and in 1946 threw 371 innings. The Tigers' Denny McLain, on his way to 31 wins in the 1968 season, had 28 complete games and pitched 336 innings. And Nolan Ryan, who pitched into the 90s during his career, had 222 complete games and in 1974 threw 332 innings. A lot of numbers, I know. Let me wrap this up, though, with some astounding facts. I used Justin Verlander in this example, but the same would be true for any of the big-name pitchers. In 1948, Hal Newhouser won 21 games, pitched 272 innings for the Tigers. He was paid $55,000, or $202 per inning. In 2014, Justin Verlander won 15 games, pitched 206 innings, was paid $20 million. That's $97,000 per inning pitched. Pretty amazing. I guess we can all draw our own conclusion from that comparison, but obviously there's a lot more to it than inflation. I'll be back in 2 minutes. It's about time for us to close the book on this chapter of the Ryan Report. Thanks to Senator Mike Crute for joining us this morning to provide some perspective on the current elections, as well as some other key issues facing our region. Remember, if you missed the show, want to see it again, or recommend it to someone else, it is available on the internet. You can find it at uppermichigansource.com. The most recent show is usually available starting on Monday afternoon. Right now, NBC has Olympic coverage set to roll, so we'll say goodbye, and I hope we'll see you again next Sunday morning.